Right, so welcome everyone to our weekly call on all matters encrypted DNS related. As you can hopefully see, the call is now being recorded, so do bear that in mind. That's your GDPR compliant notification. I don't have any presentations lined up this week, but there are a number of topics which I thought it would be useful to touch on. So there is a sort of a rough running order to these, and we'll just pick up on each of them in turn and see where the discussion takes us as we roll through. So yeah, well, with that in mind, one thing I probably wanted to highlight first, and if anyone has anything pertinent to say to these, and so unmute or raise your hand or put something in the chat, whichever of those three is easier for you. So the first topic, though, again this week in the weekly headlines that I sent out earlier, I flagged another instance of a malware family taking advantage of DoH for its command and control capabilities, which I think that's the second week running where that has occurred. And I know we had a few before Christmas, so there does seem to be something of a trend in that regard. I don't know if others are sort of picking up on this and whether it's a concern or not. And in particular, for those of you that make software tools on the cybersecurity side, whether that's a development that you're sort of looking into in terms of detection and protection for whether it's enterprises or consumers. So just pause for a moment there and see if anyone's got anything to comment on in terms of malware taking advantage of encrypted DNS to go about its rather unfortunate purposes.
Sorry, I do actually have a question regarding to that. In Canada, they're now starting to think through the regulatory bodies about whether TSPs should be blocking botnets, and whether or not these botnets are taking advantage of DoH in order to masquerade themselves from client devices. So I don't know what I'm interested to hear what the rest of the global group here has to say about whether or not service providers should be in the business of blocking botnets as it relates to encrypted DNS.
Okay. Anyone got any thoughts on that? I guess particularly ISPs, but any views from others welcome as well. In terms of
if they use DoH for name resolution, I think it would be particularly difficult to block them. So only the IP address will be visible then.
Yes, yeah, I think that's a fair point, Gianpaolo. And I don't know, Ron, if the discussions in Canada have gone as far as to how you might detect.
Well, that's part of the challenge, right? And part of it is thinking through the ability to use DNS to do that, knowing that IP addresses can change all the time.
Yeah.
And doing it from an IP perspective certainly is effective, but you start blocking large blocks of IPs and you end up doing the same. You end up creating a bigger problem than you're trying to solve potentially.
Yeah. And I must admit, I've not looked at the recent instances of malware in terms of whether they're going via any of the popular CDNs, which clearly will make it particularly challenging to block at the IP address level, which I suppose if I was trying to build a sort of malware, that's probably what I might be tempted to do for that very reason. Just
if I was too. Right?
Speaking for a friend.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, it's a long time since I did any programming, I hasten to add, so I'm not sure I have the relevant capabilities to do that anymore.
It's exactly that that blocking as a voluntary thing is a good idea almost always. The challenge comes when that is enforced by law. So I think the wording of what Canada's proposal is going to be is very important. Is it the case that TSPs will be required to offer a blocking service, or is it required that they will apply a blocking service by default? That's, I think, where the interesting division comes in. When you start enforcing certain types of content, whether they be malicious or otherwise, by law, that gets into some pretty hairy territory very quickly.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I don't believe that the regulator will force anybody to do this at hand. I think it would be still an opt-in or opt-out, and giving consumers the ability to say yes or no to those things.
Yeah.
I think that's the direction that they want to take, but again, it's a, call it a call for papers or a call for suggestions on how the regulator can take advantage of telecom service providers, big and small, to act on blocking this, and being in the middle between my customer and the internet. I personally don't think that we should be in the business of blocking those things. It's an interesting topic, because even from a media perspective, you get into those dicey situations where third-party companies are using content that they get for either free or small price, and then resell it to people and put their content in various countries to have it broadcast to paying customers, and they're getting the content the wrong way or not legitimately. So those are things that we've been grappling with over the last year. But the idea in and of itself, a service provider should have my eyes closed to most of the stuff that goes on, right? But we do owe it to our customers to help keep them safe.
Yeah.
And they have to be the ones to say yes to that.
And you reminded me of the tool that I know Luca Derry showed us a couple of months ago now, the most recent version, which seemed to show promise in at least detecting DoH traffic streams transiting a network, which I suppose gives you a fighting chance of then doing something next with them if you can detect their presence. But it would certainly need those sorts of tools.
Agreed.
And I can see some comments in the chat. Well, firstly, to answer Mark's question, which I've only just seen, which was the question, such that it was, Mark, was I just sort of mentioned that there's been in the last couple of weeks some stories about two separate instances of malware exploiting the use of DoH to provide its command and control capability, and that really prompted the discussion that we were then just having, that Ron brought up, about the Canadian regulator potentially mandating, is that the right phrase, Ron?
No, not mandating. Let's not use that strong word. That they are, we're encouraging. As a whole, the country is trying to find solutions to how to do this, right? So it's open to comments and suggestions from all of the service providers in Canada. But again, I don't think they're in that frame of mandating, but they are suggesting that we should be looking at ways to do this. And obviously, an opt-in or an opt-out model might work. And I think we're all kind of grappling with what that looks like and how you would even implement that and how would you even detect it. And then that layers into, like, if you're using DoH for command and control, how do you even know what's happening?
Yeah.
So are they soliciting industry responses or just suggesting best practices at this point? Soliciting?
They're soliciting for industry responses.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. Sorry, I was late.
No worries.
That's okay. So I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts as to what those practices would be, and in asking that rhetorical question, then I can see to quickly summarize some comments in the chat from Glenn, that users should at least get as good a protection as they would have got over sort of DNS over 53. So there are no surprises in their DNS capability. Pat has highlighted that in the UK, there has been blocking of websites for copyright protection purposes since 2011, but that's all backed by court orders or equivalent. So there's a sort of a reasonably transparent and challengeable process for that.
Yeah, I posted the link to the Canadian Regulatory and Telecommunications Commission and their call for papers there, if anybody's interested in reading that.
So an opportunity for people to respond if that's of interest, which would be, I guess, tremendously helpful by the sound of it at the moment. Okay, any other thoughts on that? Any other observations that spring to mind?
Andrew, there are a few hands raised, so I don't know in which order you want to. Okay.
Yes, I'm looking in the wrong place on my screen. Thank you, Arno. That's most helpful. So in the order that I think they've been raised, I think Ralph, then Arno, then Jim. So Ralph first.
I actually was last, so it's, I think, the other order round. If
Okay.
I looked at it correctly.
Okay, all right. Well, in that case, that's very fair of you, Ralph. Jim, in that case, you want to jump in first then?
Thanks. So I think Arno was in front of me.
Okay, you're all being incredibly courteous.
Come on, come on.
Oh no, then one of you, anyone.
Okay.
He was the one that was complaining. You had the hands up. Why don't you go, Arno?
No, come on. But anyway, so pleased to see you, all of you today. Yeah. So from my point of view, it's important for the ISPs to at least have the capability. Now, there can be multiple ways to look at it. Yes, it can be mandated by some governments or by some jurisdiction. I can only imagine that a number of things that are happening in the EU in the review of the NIS directive may end up in such requests, especially when you consider what happened from the security threat landscape and what is likely to happen in terms of the explosion of the attack surface. It would be surprising that the governments do not take the opportunity to ask the key actors that are the service providers to actually create some capabilities there. Some may be for normal operations, some may be for catastrophic operations. So that's one thing. Now, is it possible to detect and so on? That's another complication, but for me, having the possibility to block is clearly a requirement that will come from governments. But there is another one which might be a business requirement, because a number of service providers do want to offer security business to their business customers. And in this case, of course, we all know from previous meetings that we are against a party that understands security can only happen from the two ends of the communication. But that doesn't work. That just does not work from a deployment perspective, from a cost perspective, from an operation perspective, from a security perspective. There are tons of reasons why it doesn't work. So we are made on the belief that the world should only be done by securing the two ends of the communication. Sorry, it doesn't work. Some enterprise customers cannot survive without a network security, and they expect a party to offer them that, or they will try to do it by themselves. It depends. So here, there is a market view on how this should happen and how it can happen. A number of operators have provided blocking capabilities for many, many years as anti-malware, antivirus, and so on. Now, back to Ron's point on the botnet part, the botnet hunt has always been difficult for ages. Hunting and turning down a botnet requires a lot of work, and especially now that the command and control servers are distributed, this is creating another complication. But this is certainly something that is hitting the operators themselves and their customers. So I would be surprised that this is not in the plans of being created. So at least I see three main reasons why this should happen. I would add a fourth one, is that I would know a bunch of residential customers and citizens that would expect their ISP to provide them security. And this should be part of it. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Arno. And yeah, I certainly agree. I think on the residential side, there's maybe a higher expectation of protections, but Jim,
Did you bring up, sorry, you bring up a good point there. Just let me respond to that if you don't mind. We do provide business customers with that type of service, right? We already do that today, and they expect it and they pay for that service. So we do have the capability of doing that, but it's the residential multi-millions of individual people at home that may not even know what that means. Like if I were to say, hey, we're going to protect you from a botnet, do they even know what that means, right? So it's helping them understand what it is that we're trying to protect them from. Protected browsing and parental controls is one thing, because that's worded in a way that people understand what that means. But when you start to get down into the weeds of the certain aspects of the nefarious internet criminals that do this, it's really difficult to help people understand what it is that you're trying to help them be protected against.
Yeah, we're very much in the realms of stuff that isn't mainstream, at least from the consumer point of view. So you're absolutely right. Explaining it is a challenge. Speaking of not mainstream, Jim, do you want to jump on?
Yeah, just that last point. Selling this to the end user might not be in case of talking about botnets and other sorts of jargon, which most people simply will not understand. But that pitch can be very, very simple. Tick the box here for more security without going into specifics about what that means. Do you want to be more secure? Well, sure, I'll have some of that and pay an extra $2 a month or whatever it is. Yeah, sure, why not? So I don't think that's too much of a concern, depending on how it's promoted. It saves me hand waving because I'm not a marketing person and I don't run DNS service for anybody other than myself. But the issue I wanted to talk about was the thing that someone mentioned earlier about whether these kinds of control mechanisms get baked into regulations or law. And sadly, I have to say, I think that's the direction we're generally headed in. It may not necessarily be done with a heavy legal instrument. It may be done by things like voluntary codes of conduct. I understand that's how things are done in the UK just now. There are certain websites and IP addresses that are blocked for various reasons. Pat's Tappy has mentioned some of them: copyright violations, child abuse imagery, all that kind of stuff. But I could see more of this thing coming along. And in the UK, we have something like that already for the public sector. The Dominet's running a resolver service on behalf of public sector enterprises, which, if I understand correctly, blocks access to undesirable content and supposedly stops people in the public sector being exposed to malware and phishing attacks, because that service is being fed malware information data, which allows them to block or intercept certain types of DNS lookups and stop people getting to things they're not supposed to be going to. So I think that's the way things are headed. And something just to bear in mind about this is, coming from a slightly different direction, there was an ITU council meeting last week, and there was a proposal from the Russian government asking for the ITU to get more involved around the issues of DoH and DOT and DOQ deployment, because of the impact this has on things like child protection and other concerns. Now, that may be how it's being presented in that ITU setting, but I'm sure the arguments there are not just about those particular concerns, but they're also about things like monitoring, interception, suppressing human rights, all those other nice, lovely things that go on in certain parts of the world. And there will be considerable support from that from, I would imagine, Arab states and China and one or two others, because that fits the mindset of the world. Now, the debate in the ITU setting has effectively been kicked into long grass for now, but I expect that's going to come up again and again, and will no doubt figure in the WTSA meeting. It's when ITU decides its grand strategic 5-year plans, and that WTSA meeting takes place around about a year's time from now. So this stuff is now getting attention for governments And I think it's naive to think that we can continue operating the way things are currently operating. There's going to be pressure for this. And all it takes is for a Congress critter or a member of Parliament to say, would somebody think of the children? And governments and regulators will be compelled to act. So this thing is going to happen more and more. I think it's already starting to happen in various ways already, but it's inevitable there's going to be more of this. And I think the big question is it going to be compulsory or is it going to be voluntary, but with a fairly big stick, which is it's really in your best interest, ISPs, CSPs, whatever, to comply.
Yeah, and before I go on to Ralph, one of the topics which I'll come back to because we're looking at it for the next couple of weeks or so, is looking at the safety versus privacy trade-off, which sort of plays into that discussion as well, potentially. The key thing here is transparency as much as anything. But with that in mind, Ralph, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, so the child protection issue usually plays out, but there are cases where it hasn't. I mean, in Germany, they tried that stuff on the blocking and failed. But overall, I mean, I used to, well, over 10 years ago now, run DNS for a pan-European provider. And out of these 13 countries we operated in, over half of them had legislations that kind of mandated you as an ISP to block stuff. And they usually use DNS for that because it's just convenient. And I was actually having chats with lots of regulators, and they said, I told them, well, technically, if you change your DNS server, nobody else will they can go around that. And said, well, that's not a problem because, say, if we get 85 or 90% of the people not going there, that's enough. Now with DoH and ODO and all these kind of mechanisms becoming more available, this might change. So that's probably also why we are seeing this interest from kind of governments and ITU at the moment on that topic. And I have the feeling that, I mean, so far, at least from my perspective, all of the kind of global providers have been not approached by the regulators, but I think it's only a question of time until this happens.
Yep.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Ralph. Arno, did you raise your hand again, or did I forget to lower it?
No, I raised my hand again. Just a quick note, Andrew. Careful when you use the term safety, because the term safety relates to a completely different world. Right? The term security is about bits and bytes. The term safety is about blood and flesh. Right? So and they are intertwined together. Now, I just to say that I echo both Ralph and Jim that the trend on the regulator side will increase. I think that we have too many big changes overall and other pressure points that are coming from geopolitics that are going to make this a reality, so whether we like it or not. Yeah, and so back to Ron, I understand, of course, you are running it for your business. The problem with the residential users is that I think people have residential users behave like residential users of 20 years ago. And it's not the case anymore. The distinction between an employee in a company and a residential user is sharding or getting more and more fuzzy. And this is a phenomenon that people do not take enough into account. Look in a company. In a company today, people are going to use tools that are used by any residential user today. Because companies on their IT, there is a movement to the cloud that happened that is going to make it very interesting for them to use Gmail in terms of Microsoft Exchange and other things. And this is a reality. And so we have the impression that treating a residential user versus a business user is different. Well, there are reasons why it is different, but they have more to do with the experience. They have more to do with the communication to the person than to the technicality. The real issue that we are not solving in this story is not that we can block and so on. The real problem we have is to actually manage the user experience to include both privacy and security in something meaningful to the human being. And unfortunately, we fail to recognize that we have not enough research. We are at kilometers away to have something that would make sense for a user, depending on his anthropology, whether we do a tool for a Chinese in China, whether we do a tool for a German in Germany, or to an American in the US. That's where we have an enormous problem that is not helping us to compensate for all of these inelegancies we have in terms of what is a botnet that we cannot communicate, and why do we have security versus privacy? Because we have it. And that's where so I forgot who said that we have problems that are outside of DoH, but it was very true. We are trying to deal with something where we have a deficit of a framework outside of DoH and ADD. That's the unfortunate problem. Over.
Thanks, Arnaud. And yeah, I think we can all agree it's complicated and getting ever more so. And I can see in the chat, amongst other comments, I'll read this out loud because it tickled my sense of humor slightly. Rest assured, regulators and governments are taking an interest in DOT and DoH amongst other matters. Said Pat from the sort of principal UK regulator, which I'm sure will be assuring to some and troublesome to others, depending on your perspective in this whole discussion. But I'll take it as a statement of fact. So thank you, Pat, for that confirmation. Okay, let's move the discussion on, if I may. But I think that was certainly interesting and good to apply it into a very sort of current example in terms of the Canadian market. Now, I'll pose this as a question because I think at least one of the parties is on the call again this week. When we were talking last week, the issue about an increase in misrouted traffic because of lack of visibility of DNS, so EDNS even, came up as an issue. And I know there was then some offline conversation that triggered. I don't know if there's anything that anyone's able to just add to the comment that came up more in passing last week, whether there's any additional data to give any more sort of granularity to that, or whether that's still a work in progress. And I think I saw Hani on this week, so don't know if you're able to unmute Hani, whether you do have any more hard data, or if it's something you're still investigating.
Hey, Andrew, do you hear me okay?
Absolutely fine, yes, indeed.
I don't have any additional details. We are still looking at it very closely. We have multiple endpoints that exhibited this particular phenomena, and it's not easy because we don't have full visibility into this traffic as you probably expect. So we're still trying to figure out if this is a natural phenomena or it's misbehaving and routing advertisement, or it's anything related to EDNS. So hopefully within the next couple of weeks, we'll figure it out and can say for sure if it's anything related to DoH or not.
Okay, so I guess if anybody else has any thoughts on that or is tracking that at all, yeah, okay, we can certainly come back to it in a few weeks' time. But if anybody else is picking up anything in this regard, that will certainly be useful to see if we can triangulate between different network operators and understand the scale of the challenge, or whether as Hani, as you said, whether maybe it's something else that's really causing the issue. Because I know when we first looked at some of the potential impacts of encrypting DNS. So there were concerns it would really push up off-net costs for ISPs and potentially therefore have a detrimental impact on end user experience if people weren't careful and if the data wasn't transparently relayed onwards. I can see Pat has put in the chat, yeah, about Cloudflare being very public about ignoring client subnet in EDNS. So maybe it's something we'll come back to in a few weeks' time and have a better understanding of what this is looking like. Okay, thanks, Hanny. If anybody else has got any more to add, feel free to pop it in the chat. Or I see which Pat just has. So a question whether Google or indeed Quad9 or others are taking a similar approach to Cloudflare. Okay, John, do you want to just expand on your chat comment in case anyone's not looking at the chat, depending on what device they're on? John Todd, that is, from Quad9.
Yep. So ECS on our standard address contingent, but we have a special service address 99911 and secondaries which do send ECS. So that requires customers to be involved in the process, though. They have to choose that address. We're not big fans of ECS, but we recognize there are some places that require it.
Yeah. Thanks, John. That's helpful. So at least some resolver operators are aware of this, which is a good thing. Okay. Right. So continue to work through my checklist. Some of us I know were on the ADD interim working group session last week, which, as billed by the co-chairs, had a comparatively small percentage of presentation material and a much bigger chunk of time allocated to discussion, which I think it's fair to say was successfully used by the working group. Seemed pretty constructive. For those of us that were on the call, not just thinking of Glenn, although I know Glenn's on here, but there are others on the call as well. I don't know if anyone's got any reflections on the working group session that you think it'd be useful to share. I'll give you a moment to think or put comments. Yeah, Glenn.
Well, I can jump in if you like.
Sure.
How's my audio level first?
It's clear to me. Hopefully it is to others. Okay.
Somebody recently told me my iPad audio level was poor, so I started being paranoid now. So I think the session went really well. I thought we had really good attendance. We had a lot of good chatter. It's been a very productive, evolving landscape, I think, within ADD's discussion. If you look back to where we started from, and then cover through the discussions we've had through the various interims and working sessions, we've come a long way. We've dealt with the discussion of authorization in the past and the role of DHCP and RA. We've dealt with more in-depth discussions, and we've evolved what we think the use cases are. And I think we've got to a pretty good place where we now have adoption of the DEAR draft, and I will be publishing to the ADD list the information about the GitHub repository. We're going to publish that in. I think the name finally got settled on Friday to be called DDR. So DEAR will become DDR. And we have two working group adoption calls out right now, one for the DHCP RA stuff that's contained within BTW Home. And we have an adoption call for the box requirements draft, which has gone through a lot of evolution as the group has discussed, and I know Chris has worked very hard at capturing the material there. And I don't anticipate we would ever publish that as an RFC. I've seen some people comment about that on the list, but that's not the intention there. Making it a working group document simply reflects that the contents of it ultimately will be managed and edited centrally and will be done through consensus. Whereas an individual draft, anybody can write an individual draft as they like and put anything they like into it. It doesn't mean it has working group consensus ultimately. So that's why we are pushing to adopt the requirements draft as a working group document. So ultimately we can get to reflect consensus and not just, you know, Chris's ramblings. Not that Chris is prone to ramblings. He's a pretty good guy. So, and the other thing I'll finish with is, you know, between now and IETF 110, we, you know, got, we got these 2 drafts out of working group last call, or sorry, working group adoption. That's going to run for about 2 weeks, starting from mid last week, so mid next week. And then between now and 110, we have to sort of evolve what's been adopted and talk about where we want to go with things like harmonization that's come up recently on the list. I think that's an interesting thing. If we can harmonize these things, that'd be awesome. I'm still a little bit doubtful, but hey, I'd love to be proven wrong. So that's for the chair's perspective.
Fantastic, thanks, Glenn. And I must admit, if DEAR is renamed DDR, I think as a matter of principle, we ought to come up with something that we're going to call the Federated Discovery of Resolvers. So we can have an FDR to accompany the DDR.
Well, that's terrible.
For those of us with an interest in recent European history.
Does that mean we'll get a new deal?
And bring down the walls and unify the resolver proposals. So I don't know if anybody else had any other reflections on the session last Wednesday. Anything else to add from Glenn's pretty comprehensive summary there? Other than it was particularly impressive how you coordinated with the Deprive working group so that we had a half-hour break between the two, which was much appreciated by some of us, Glenn. So thank you.
That was pure dumb luck. We did not actually coordinate that, but it would have been awesome had we.
Claim it. No one will know. But no, it worked quite well with the sequencing as it happened, in my humble opinion. Okay, just one other topic that I had was I think we've seen an increasing number of DoH trials either sort of kicking off or in many cases completing. And I wondered whether that's a topic we ought to revisit on one of our sort of future calls over the next few weeks to sort of try and pull some of the learnings that are coming out of those various trials, and maybe also some of the different approaches that people are taking. So I'll sort of throw that out there. If anyone's got any thoughts on that, either put them in the chat or maybe come back to me offline, and we can see if there's sufficient interest maybe to set up a call with that as a main theme. Because it's about 18 months, I think, since Concast kicked off its trial, maybe even more than that, Glenn. And there've been quite a few others since then. So I think there's quite a lot of learning now that's come out of the various trials at the ISP level, and obviously a lot of implementations with some of the sort of cloud-based resolvers like Quad9 and elsewhere. So there's an awful lot of learning now to maybe reflect on. So I think that could be a good thing, but I'm open to comments from others as to what you think.
So Andrew, I think that's a really good thing. I'll say though that right now I think a lot of people are kind of grappling with its Q1, and everybody keeps having multi-day strategy meetings we all have to attend. It's making getting real work done very hard.
So is that a comment about maybe timing of something, Glenn, or was that just a general observation?
It was about timing. I think if we were still doing in-person things, I could see that there's actually probably a pretty good pretty good body of people who would be interested in knowing more experiences about load balancing, and addressing and other choices that, the pros and cons from the people who have done it. And so, if we're meeting, I would expect we would be having some papers and submissions done at various of our, industry events.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's give that some thought then. And then finally from me, and then I'll shut up and see what else is on people's minds. Just looking ahead over the next few weeks, notwithstanding that. And going back to what I said earlier, potentially next week, and I'll be able to confirm later on this week, we will have a discussion around the sort of safety versus privacy, and I do mean safety rather than security, to answer the question that Arno posed about the sort of trade-offs there, just to reflect on that. Also, we'll have a presentation just for a change, looking at DNSSEC and specifically on some of the necessary changes to encryption when you start to think about the sort of post-quantum encryption in particular, and how that needs to evolve fairly soon now. And then finally, probably towards the end of this month, we're going to have a discussion around centralization and some of the implications of that. Obviously, that includes DNS and other factors as well, but just to pull together some thinking around centralization as a sort of a panel discussion, then open it up to wider conversation, just to sort of change the change the structure slightly on one of our calls. So that's what I've got coming up over the next few weeks at the moment. But what other topics are on other people's minds just now? Any other issues or other points that people want to raise this week? And yeah, either raise your hand, I should say, or put something in the chat if that is easier. So I'll pause for a moment or two, see if there is anything anyone has on their mind. Did everyone see Tim Cook's announcement? Do you want to expand on that, Arno, to give clarity as to what specifically you were referring to?
Yeah, it was about the announcements from Apple CEO about his radical change of paradigm regarding privacy and data. Okay,
so that which is due to come out or to be implemented in the next few months.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I think this is the kind of announcements that will have an impact on what we do, because it is radically changing the paradigm on privacy, on data, and therefore on privacy. It will have a major impact everywhere. And so I'm saying this because it was a joke, of course, but I remember Jim asked perhaps 2 meetings ago about where are we going to discuss about the politics aspects of what we are trying to do here. And I think he was right. And I think this is the type of announcements that is a breaking news in that mix. That's why I made the comment. Over.
Yeah, fair enough. And I know on the back of the Apple announcement, Mark Zuckerberg has made some counter comments, and I think
yes, of course,
he
has a lot to lose.
Yes, I think Facebook started an initiative this week closely linked to that, so it's very much a theme of the moment, and will be over the next few weeks and months, I'm sure. So yeah, that's going to be very topical. So that's a point well made. Thank you, Arno. Anything from anyone else at the moment? Anything else on your minds? Or any other hot topics currently that you think we need to give some consideration to? Give me a moment just to think again.
Just a question, completely naive. I believe there are companies that are working on DoH proxies. Is this something that we should ask them, or because I'm late on here, maybe have you already discussed with such propositions, or does it make sense for the team to discuss those technology, or completely open?
Okay. Well, anyone want to pick up on that in terms of is anyone looking at some of the DNS proxies? I've seen a few fairly recent announcements on some of those, and I think some of you are involved in them. Want to comment on that?
When you say proxy, can you be more specific? That's an overloaded term in this industry.
Okay, Arnaud, what did you mean specifically on that then?
Yeah, so I know my company and others have been looking at the issues of DoH from a security perspective, and because we want to give the right for enterprises to defend themselves, we started to develop technologies for that. And I just wonder in the interception weaponry if these are things that we should be discussing or not here. That's all.
Are you talking about things that intercept DoH or unwillingly or willingly? I think is really my question.
No, willingly,
okay.
willingly, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I don't know enough about it. Well, I mean, DNS dist is the, if you want to call it a proxy, that's what we're utilizing, and we've got quite a bit of experience with it. So it's not actually a resolver itself; it's just an intermediate layer. It works quite well. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, no, it was just because we discussed about blocking and not blocking. Maybe we should speak about the tooling that exists, making a review of the tooling that exists for intercepting. That's more what I had in mind in terms of the abstraction about it, not the specific about it.
Well, I know we've got Open Exchange. I haven't scanned down the list to see if anyone from Infoblox is on, and certainly some of the other companies in that space. So we've got a number of people here on the call in that who are welcome to comment.
Again, I think it's a matter whether we actually are talking about interception or are talking about people that actually want to use a proxy.
Yeah, I think Arnaud said it he was referring to voluntary as opposed to
yes.
involuntary use,
yes.
which is very different.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Well, okay, well, maybe that's something we'll look at for a future call then. Arnaud, we'll make a note of that. Thank you for that. Okay, anything from anyone else this week that's on your minds? For a chance to think. If not, well, let's draw a call to a close there. I think there's an interesting discussion on a number of things, but particularly on our first topic around malware and then botnets. So food for thought, and I'll include from the chat some of the comments, including some of the links, notably the one with a link to the Canadian regulators sort of discussion about that. So if anyone feels able to contribute to the discussion, I'm sure that will be gratefully received. So on that note, thanks everyone for your time this week, and we'll speak again this time next week. So have a great weekend. Thank you.